What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. In today's episode, we're continuing the preview series and we're moving on to the Big 12. In this video, I'm going to be going over the teams that I think are kind of more on the outside looking in, the teams that are going to be competing more for bowl eligibility and maybe trying to make a run from the bottom half of the conference into the top half. I'm going to go over each of the teams that I have kind of the bottom 7 in the conference. But before I do, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. But without further ado, let's dive right into it. Kind of why I'm thinking this conference could be really tense at the bottom. This is probably the most competitive conference in college football. I'll go over more of that when I talk about the teams that I think are going to be competing for the title. And I think it's a 17-team conference this year. Or that's the ACC, excuse me. I think the Big 12 is a 16-team conference, I believe. Starting things out with the Cincinnati Bearcats. They were the worst team last year, one of the 4 newbies to the conference, and they really struggled. It was a rude welcome to the conference. Their lone win came over a fellow newcomer in Houston, and they finished with a record of 3-9, 1-8 in conference. They have 13 starters returning, 7 offense, 4 defense, punter and kicker. They had the number 5 rushing offense in the country last year. That's led by running back Corey Kiner. And they were 33rd overall in yards per game, but they were just 84th in scoring. So I think really what they need to do is the Bearcats need to be a lot better at scoring when they have those opportunities. They're bringing in running back Evan Pryor from Ohio State along with Chance Williams from Grambling State. They had quarterback Brendan Sorsby from Indiana, and wide receiver Xavier Henderson is their leading receiver. So Sorsby and Henderson are going to have to step up to kind of help the passing offense keep up with the rushing. Obviously, when you rush that well, among the best in college football, you're going to kind of lean on that a little bit more, but you do want to be able to incorporate passing, and I think they're also, again, going to need to improve their red zone offense and their scoring. They also have all 5 offensive linemen returning, led by a third-team All-American, first-team Big 12, Luke Kandra. Defensively, they were 69th, nice, against the pass, but they were 93rd or worse in every other key category. So they're really going to need to step up. Some of those guys who are going to lead that charge in terms of returners are defensive lineman Dante Corleone, known as the Godfather, fittingly so, Don Corleone. I mean, that's a pretty awesome name right there. And then also linebackers Jared Bartlett, Jack Dingle, and Jonathan Thompson. Incoming guys, they have Kai Stokes from Ohio State, Mickey Miller from New Mexico State, Josh Minkins from Louisville, and Logan Wilson, not the guy from Wyoming who I believe is in the NFL now, but Logan Wilson from North Texas. Their schedule is reasonably not horribly challenging. When you're at the bottom of the conference, every team obviously is going to be coming in with higher expectations than you. Obviously, they have their own expectations for themselves, but they avoid Oklahoma State, they avoid Utah, Arizona, and Kansas. All 4 of those teams are probably, I would say, the 4 teams with the best shot to win the conference this year. I would put those 4 as the top 4. So not having to face any of them is a huge benefit. Their schedule features 4 of the 7 teams that are projected to finish in the bottom half of the Big 12. So if they can win 3 of those, I think their non-conference schedule is reasonable. I think they face Pitt, which will be difficult, but I think other than that, they should do well in non-conference play. So if you can win 3 of those 4 games and maybe steal one from the top half, I think that's the Bearcats' path to bowl eligibility. Coming in next is Arizona State. The Sun Devils are coming in as a new team to the conference. I think they're kind of in their own tier. The other 3 teams that are coming in terms of record, I guess Colorado would be grouped with them, but obviously they have such a different, I guess, outlook and just story around that program than Arizona State does. So I'm not quite grouping them together. So the question for the Sun Devils is, will the transition to the Big 12 aid or subtract from their potential improvement? They're a team that brings back just 7 starters, 4 on offense, 3 on defense. That's not as huge of an indication as it used to be, but I think there is still something to be said for continuity. I think the defending national champions are the prime example of that. No pun intended to the other team that's coming in from the Pac-12 that was under 500. I think they're the prime example of that. They had a very cohesive unit that had played together for a few years. So I think teams have shown that they can win when they utilize transfers. Florida State did a good job of that, even though they just missed out on the playoff, obviously, last year. But I think there is something to be said for having that continuity and that cohesive unit. Arizona State loses quarterback Jaden Rashada and wide receiver Elijah Badger. Both of them are gone. They bring in Sam Levitt at quarterback from Michigan State. They have a pretty talented running back tandem of Cam Scatabo and Raleek Brown. And then at wide receiver, they bring in as wide receivers coach the legendary NFL receiver with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Hines Ward, to coach that group. And the two guys who lead the way with that are Jordan Tyson and Troy O'Meara. So their passing offense was 86th. Everything else was 109th or worse, rushing, scoring, total offense. So this is a team that really is going to need to step it up offensively, and we'll see how Sam Levitt does. He didn't have a whole lot of experience with the Spartans, so kind of a bit of an unknown there, but maybe he is the missing piece for this unit. Defensively, they did really well against the rush, and now whether that's to be said, a Pac-12 conference where they mostly pass the ball anyways, but other Pac-12 teams didn't rank quite as high against the rush, so I think that does show they do a good job stopping that, but they were 89th in everything else, 89th or worse. Defensive ends, Clayton Smith and Prince Dorba are really the only guys on this defense that made sizable contributions. From the defensive line, they combined for 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, and 14 QB hurries. But outside of them, they didn't do a great job as a team of pressuring the quarterback. They have freshman defensive tackle CJ Fight, who should make a contribution. And then they have a couple of transfers coming in from two teams that were really good last year, Arizona and Louisville, with Jacob Rich Kungaika, I think, and Jeffrey Clark. And then in the linebacker unit, Keyshawn Elliott, and they have safeties coming back, Shamari Simons and Xavier Alford. Behind them now, the Sun Devils, is the NCAA investigation and the sanctions, I believe, from the Herm Edwards brief era. I'm trying to remember if those happened before or during and after his tenure. So that's behind them now. Do they have a clear road ahead from Tempe to success in the Big 12? I doubt it. I doubt it starting this year, at least, with how competitive the conference is. I think they have, obviously, a chance to rebuild. Arizona State, if you're playing EA College Football 25, which I imagine most people watching this video are at least going to try their hands at getting back on the sticks playing that game, they'd be a really good candidate for a rebuild because it's been a while since they've had success, but there has been good success at Arizona State before. Their schedule this year is tougher, actually much tougher, I would say, than Cincinnati's. They have Kansas and Utah at home, and then they have road games against Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Arizona. I mentioned four of those teams before. I think Kansas State could also be grouped in really the top five. I think those five teams are the five teams with the best shot to win the conference this year, and having all of them on the schedule is a tough break for Arizona State. Moving quickly now into Houston. They went 4-8, 2-7 last year, 7 starters coming back, 4 offense, 2 defense, and a kicker. They weren't the worst of the newbies to the Big 12, but they weren't the best either. And I think the big question is, will Willie Fritz bring a wave to Houston? Coming in from Tulane, he had a highly successful tenure there with the Green Wave and kind of the Group of 5 level. And now he comes into Houston. He brings a couple of players with him as well, including defensive end Keith Cooper Jr. The question for Houston, I think, is what they are able to do this year. With their second year in the conference, they showed that they acclimated fairly well, not great. They have quarterback Donovan Smith leading the way, threw for 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns and a 64.5 completion percentage, 64.5 completion percentage. They have a running back grouping of Parker Jenkins, Tony Mathis Jr., and Stacy Sneed. Fritz runs a bit more of a run-heavy offense, so those guys should see their production increase. A challenge will be replacing 4 offensive lineman starters. And then for Smith, wide receivers Jonah Wilson, Mekhi Muse, and Joseph Manjack IV. Defensively, no unit ranked better than 98th, which is really, bottom of the barrel. 98th was their rushing defense. Everything else was worse than that. That's not going to win football games. Again, mentioned Keith Cooper Jr. coming in from Tulane. They also have cornerback Latrell McCutcheon. Some of their top returners are A.J. Hawley at free safety and Jamal Morris at linebacker. So Houston defensively has some pieces coming back. Their secondary is going to be bolstered by a few Division I transfers, but overall they're going to need that help. So maybe that'll be what helps them, along with Cooper Jr. coming in from Tulane. Their schedule features a tough non-conference game at Oklahoma. They also host Iowa State, Utah, and Kansas State, and they go to Kansas and Arizona. I would say out of these first 3 teams that I've gone over, based on the schedule and based on kind of year-to-year improvement, I think Cincinnati has the best chance. I think these first 3 teams, though, probably all miss bowl games. I think the other 4 teams that I'm going to go over now have a better shot at getting into bowl games. That's kind of my assessment here. BYU, they were second best among newcomers, 5-7, I guess tied with Houston in conference at 2-7. 11 starters coming back, 5 on offense and defense, and their kicker. They challenged both of the Oklahoma teams. They kept the games against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State close. And overall, I think have a good chance to make some progress this year. They signed Baylor and South Florida transfer quarterback Jerry Bohannon, who has been out since 2022, but showed some signs of promise, I guess, for Baylor. I think he won the 2021 Sugar Bowl, I believe. I'll have to double check on which bowl game it was, but I know he had a good game there. He's going to compete for reps and playing time and for the starting job with Jake Retzlaff. Whichever one of those guys wins the battle is going to be thrown to Chase Roberts, Darius Lassiter, and Cody Epps. And running back L.J. Martin bolsters that offense, which will need to improve. They had just 23.1 points per game last year and 309.8 yards per game, which was pretty far down in the national rankings. 3 offensive linemen come back with this offense. Defensively, kind of like Houston, it was the defensive issues that plagued them often at times. They were 91st or worst, and they were also the worst team in all of FBS at getting to the quarterback. They had just 11 sacks last year, which ranked dead last in the NCAA FBS level for sacks. So that is an area that'll need to improve drastically. Defensive end Tyler Batty was the team leader with 9 TFLs. He'll be joined by Isaiah Bagna at defensive end, and a couple of other guys to watch on the defense: linebacker Ben Bywater, cornerback Jacob Robinson, and safety Micah Harper. Their schedule features also kind of a tougher non-conference game at SMU, and then they get home games against Kansas State, Arizona, Oklahoma State, and Kansas, and go on the road to Utah. So they, obviously in the Holy War, so they benefit greatly from having most of those tougher games at home. I think if they're probably going to need to steal one of those games against any of those, probably 2 to make a bowl. They're probably going to have to steal 2 of those games to make a bowl game. I think they are a contender for making a bowl, 5-7. They only need 1 win improvement. I think Kalani Sitake had the Cougars at a really good level, playing as an independent, and I think they can make the steps now in the Big 12. A team that is a candidate for improvement, but honestly I actually probably would group them more with the previous 3, is Baylor. They are by Lindy Sports, which is the magazine that I use for making these previews with all the rosters and key players to watch and things like that. They were just 3-9 last year, 2-7 in conference play. Dave Aranda is firmly on the hot seat this year. Can these Bears claw back into contending for the Big 12? They had some obviously really good years, even recently, but especially the RG3 years were a lot kinder to the Bears. They bring back 15 starters, 6 on offense, 7 on defense, and kicker and punter. Just 2 of those are offensive linemen. They bring in offensive coordinator Jake Spavital, who has had success at the offensive coordinator position before, and they also bring in Toledo quarterback DeQuan Finn. As a team last year, they already ranked 36th in the pass. They bring back all 5 of their leading receivers from last year, led by the trio of Monte Baldwin, Katron Jackson, and Josh Cameron. Switching over to defense, they ranked 84th against the pass, but 110th or worse in everything else. So again, kind of like with these other teams, defense has been the issue. Maybe that's because the Big 12 is known for its offense, so that skews the numbers a little bit. But I think ranking 110th or worse shows that there's maybe bigger issues than just playing in an offense-heavy conference. The guys to watch on that are linebackers Keaton Thomas from West Virginia, and Northeast Mississippi Community College, and then Matt Jones, who led the team with 82 tackles and finished tied for second with 3 sacks. And then in the secondary, cornerbacks Caden Jenkins and safety Devin Lemire. Their schedule, they go on the road to Colorado, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia, and are home against Oklahoma State and Kansas. They benefit from not having to face Kansas State, Arizona, or Utah. So I think Baylor has a shot, and I think some of those road games really are against teams that are maybe projected to finish ahead of them but are winnable games. So this Bears team, I would say, is probably has the best chance outside of maybe Cincinnati to take some steps this year just based on their schedule alone. And the fact that they have, in this transfer era, 15 starters, that's a pretty good amount of starters coming back. Can either be a good or a bad thing. I think for the Bears, they'll be hoping it's obviously a bit more positive. Then the team that had the massive step down from being national runners-up, TCU, they finished 5-7, 3-6 in conference. Can the Horned Frogs make a step back up? Now, will they get to the level of getting back to the national championship game? No, I think that's pretty far outside the question. I will say, though, when they made that jump to the national finalist, they, I think, had 6 wins the year before, and they had 5 last year, so something that the Horned Frogs have always done well is being able to have that bounce back ability, especially under Gary Patterson, and even Sonny Dykes has shown that he has that ability too. They bring back just 9 starters, 5 offense or 5 defense, 4 on offense. They're going to have a quarterback battle between Josh Hoover and Ken Steels coming in from Vandy. They had one of the top passing offenses last year. And some of those guys that were on the receiving end are receiver Savion Williams and tight end Drake Dabney, and then running back Cam Cook. They have a very transfer-heavy offensive line. The question is obviously going to be, how will they gel? Coming in from Alabama is James Brockermeyer, who should be able to provide some valuable leadership and winning experience from his time with the Crimson Tide, obviously being coached by the greatest coach in college football history, Nick Saban. Defensively, compared to some of these other teams, they were a little bit more middle of the road, 76th in scoring, 75th against the rush, but then they were 100th or worse in pass defense and total defense. They bring in defensive coordinator Andy Avalos, who has had some success at stops. I believe one of those was Oregon before. Linebackers Nnamdi Obiazor and Johnny Hodges are kind of leading this group as it transitions from a 3-3-5 to a 4-2-5. So obviously 3-3-5, you have 3 on the defensive line of the line of scrimmage, 3 linebackers, and then 5 in the back end, which I think oftentimes the formation is kind of 2 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, and then a nickelback who kind of moves around, or maybe a star position or something along those lines. Although now I think about it, the star is maybe a little bit more of a linebacker. So they move from that unit to having 4 on the line, 2 linebackers, and kind of that same back 5. So maybe a little bit different. Sometimes you'll have obviously those guys on the edges dropping back in a 4-2-5. In that secondary, the leading guys are especially Bud Clark at safety. I think he was a sophomore, maybe, or even a freshman for that national finalist team, the runner-up team in 2022. And then they bring in a couple of transfers, Davion Neal from Tulane, Osafa Mensah from Notre Dame, and Caleb Elarms Orr from Cal. Their schedule features a road game at SMU as well, at Kansas, at Utah, home against Oklahoma State and Arizona. So, again, they have games against those top 4 teams. I think TCU has a chance to win their games on their schedule that they should, but I don't really see too much potential for pulling an upset against any of these teams. So finally, rounding things off for the teams that are going to be fighting for bowl eligibility, I think out of these teams, they're last for a reason. I think they have a best shot to make even a further step, and that's UCF, Central Florida, coming in from the American Conference. They went 6-7 and 3-6. They were the best of the newbies coming into the conference last year. They had some close losses as well. They lost by just 1 to Baylor, 2 to Oklahoma, and 1 to Texas Tech. Their offense was number 4 in rushing last year nationally. R.J. Harvey led that with 1,400 yards, and they were number 8 in total offense. They bring back 6 starters in that offensive unit, and then they also bring in quarterback KJ Jefferson from Arkansas, who did fairly well for the Razorbacks. He wasn't a world beater by any stretch, but he will bring in certainly plenty of experience at quarterback. They also have wide receivers Kobe Hudson and Xavier Townsend, and 3 offensive line starters are coming back, and they're also bringing in a 6'7" transfer, Wes Dorsey from Western Kentucky. Defensively, they also showed some pretty positive signs. They were 25th nationally against the pass, 59th in scoring, and kind of pretty middle of the road, a little bit more bottom half, 81st in total, but their main struggle was against the rush, which they ranked 122nd against. A couple of defensive tackles that will hope to improve that, Lee Hunter and Ricky Barber, and then defensive end Malachi Lawrence. At linebacker, they have some transfers coming in, Xavier Carter via LSU and UNLV, Ethan Barr coming in from Vanderbilt, and Zuri Alexander from Idaho. And then in the secondary, they have cornerback or nickelback transfer Deshaun Pace and defensive back Brian Threats, both coming in from Cincinnati. And finally, another starter returning with experience is safety Damari Henderson. So UCF's schedule, they're going to be at TCU. I think that one is a key one. That could be a game that decides which of these teams goes to a bowl game. Home against Colorado, at Florida, at Iowa State, home against Arizona, at West Virginia, a team that is expected by some to make a significant jump in the conference this year, and home against Utah. I think the Golden Knights, again, out of these teams, I think they have the best shot to achieve bowl eligibility. They were the one, I guess, of these teams that were able to get that last year. And another team that would probably be grouped into this is Colorado, but because of the way that they perform in terms of views and all that stuff, I will make probably a separate video just for them, and then I'll also go over the teams that I expect to be competing in a very deep, rich Big 12 this season. So that's all for this episode of College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. I'm your host. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. I'm signing out. Peace.